They called it fate when Xiao Zhang returned to the city after 7 years, but he called it coincidence wrapped in bad timing. The rain welcomed him first, thin and relentless, blurring the lights of the airport and soaking his coat as if the sky itself wanted to remind him of everything he had tried to forget. He smiled anyway, the kind of smile people recognize from screens and billboards, the smile that hid exhaustion, humor, and a quiet ache no interviewer ever managed to capture. He was famous now, loved by millions who believed they knew him. None of them knew why his hand trembled when his phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number, or why the scent of wet asphalt made his chest tighten. This city was where love had once bloomed and shattered, where Rindu, longing, had learned how to breathe without hope. 7 years ago, he had left with a suitcase full of scripts and dreams, promising he would come back when he was someone worth waiting for. 7 years ago, she had laughed at him, eyes bright, voice teasing, telling him that love was not a contract signed by success. 7 years ago, he had not listened. Her name was never far from his thoughts, even when he pretended it was. Every joke he cracked on set, every romantic line he delivered, carried a shadow of her laughter. He told himself it was memory, not regret. He was very good at lying to himself. The car ride from the airport felt longer than it should have. Traffic stalled, horns blared, and Xiao Zhang leaned back, staring at the ceiling as if answers might be written there. The driver recognized him in the rearview mirror and tried not to stare. Xiao Zhang caught the look and grinned. "Don't worry," he said lightly. "I'm just as stuck in traffic as everyone else." The driver laughed, tension easing, and for a moment Xiao Zhang felt almost normal. Almost. Then they passed a small cafe on the corner of an old street, its windows fogged, its sign unchanged. His breath caught before he could stop it. That cafe had once been their world. He remembered sitting there for hours, arguing about movies, stealing sugar packets, planning futures that felt so certain it was almost funny. He remembered her mock seriousness when she told him he would be famous one day, and his mock arrogance when he told her she would be the one interviewed for surviving him. The car moved on, and the cafe disappeared from view, but the ache stayed. He was in town for a charity event, interviews, meetings, and a rumored new project that everyone wanted him to confirm, and he planned to dodge with humor. He told his manager he would be busy. He didn't tell anyone that he was afraid of running into her. He didn't tell anyone that part of him hoped he would. The reunion came not with dramatic music or perfect timing, but with spilled coffee and a very familiar voice saying, "Are you always this good at making an entrance, or am I just lucky today?" Xiao Zhang froze. He turned slowly, heart pounding like a drum that had forgotten how to rest, and there she was, holding a paper cup with a spreading brown stain, eyes wide, mouth half open in shock. Time did something strange then, stretching and folding, pulling 7 years into a single breath. She looked different. Stronger. Softer. The same. "I'm sorry," she continued automatically, then stopped, recognition crashing in. "Xiao Zhang." He wanted to say something cool, something funny, something worthy of a man who had conquered stages and screens. What came out instead was, "You still drink coffee like that?" She blinked, then laughed, the sound hitting him harder than any applause ever had. "And you still deflect when you're nervous." They stood there, strangers pretending to be acquaintances, acquaintances pretending not to remember how deeply they had once known each other. People passed by, whispering, staring, unaware that they were walking through the center of a quiet earthquake. They sat down because standing felt impossible. The cafe, a different one this time, buzzed with ordinary life, and Xiao Zhang wondered how the world could look so unchanged when his had just tilted. She told him about her work, her small apartment, her habit of adopting plants and forgetting to water them. He told her about filming schedules, travel, the absurdity of fame. They laughed at the wrong moments and went quiet at the right ones. "So," she said finally, fingers wrapped around a fresh cup, "did you come back for good?" The question hovered between them, heavy and sharp. I don't know, he admitted. Did you wait? She met his gaze, eyes steady. I lived. It was not an accusation, not forgiveness, not closure. It was truth, and it cut deeper than anger ever could. Humor found them again in strange ways. He complained about hotel pillows, she teased him about his dramatic size. He joked about being bad with directions, she reminded him of the time he got lost 2 blocks from his own house. Laughter eased the tension, but underneath it, something fragile and electric waited. The city seemed determined to test them. They ran into each other again at a bookstore, again at a traffic light, again at an event where flashing cameras forced them to stand side by side, smiling for an audience that sensed chemistry without understanding its history. Rumors began to whisper, as rumors always do. Fans speculated, headlines hinted, and Xiao Zhang found himself caught between protecting his privacy and confronting his past. She, meanwhile, faced her own storm, friends asking questions, old wounds reopening. One night, after a long day of pretending, they found themselves walking along the river, the city lights reflecting like broken stars. Silence stretched, comfortable and dangerous. Do you ever regret it? She asked softly. He didn't pretend not to understand. Every day, he said. Then, with a small, self-deprecating smile, and then I regret regretting it, because I wouldn't be who I am without leaving. She nodded. I hated you for a long time. That's fair. Then I missed you. That's also fair. Now, she said, stopping to face him, I don't know what I feel. He stepped closer, not touching, giving her space even as every instinct screamed to close the distance. We don't have to know, he said. We can just be. Fate laughed at that promise. A scandal broke days later, twisting an innocent moment into something ugly. Xiao Zhang's career trembled, her name dragged into a spotlight she never wanted. Anger flared, fear followed, and old patterns threatened to repeat themselves. This time, he stayed. He held press conferences with honesty, shut down lies with calm determination, and when it was over, when the noise faded, he went to her door with no cameras, no scripts, no bravado. I'm still afraid, he told her. But I don't want to run anymore. She studied him for a long moment, seeing the boy he had been and the man he had become. Love, she said quietly, isn't about waiting for the right version of someone. It's about choosing them when they're standing in front of you. Humor returned, relief bubbling up as he laughed and said, You always did explain things better than me. They didn't promise forever that night. They promised honesty. They promised effort. They promised to laugh when things got heavy and to speak when silence threatened to grow sharp. Sinta and Rindu did not disappear. They softened, deepened, learned how to coexist with reality. Love, they discovered, was not a dramatic reunion or a perfect ending. It was a series of choices made every day, sometimes with fear, sometimes with joy, always with courage. And if you're still here, heart racing, wondering what choice you would make if fate gave you a second chance, ask yourself this before you go. Would you dare to love again, knowing how much it can hurt? Share your answer, let your voice be heard, and stay, because some stories don't end when the page does, they begin when you decide to feel. The night did not end with a kiss or a confession carved neatly into memory. It ended with them standing at her doorway, the air between them thick with words unspoken, the city humming like it knew something they didn't yet dare to name. Xiao Zhan walked away with slow steps, each one heavy, each one deliberate, as if he were teaching himself a new way of leaving, one that did not mean disappearing. Sleep avoided him. Fame had taught him how to exist under lights, under pressure, under the weight of expectations, but it had never prepared him for the quiet chaos of hope. He lay awake replaying her voice, the way she had said his name without bitterness, without longing, without certainty. That uncertainty frightened him more than anger ever had. Morning arrived with a cruel sense of normalcy. Schedules waited. Meetings demanded smiles. Interviews asked safe questions with sharp undertones. He answered them all with practiced ease, humor softening his words, deflection wrapped in charm. Yet somewhere between a joke about his favorite food and a vague hint about future projects, his mind wandered back to her small apartment, to the plant on her windowsill that leaned toward the light as if trying harder than the rest. She, too, woke with a restlessness she pretended was just another busy day. She told herself she had made peace with the past, that seeing him again was merely a reminder, not a reopening. But when she reached for her phone and stopped herself from checking messages that weren't there, she knew peace was still a work in progress. They tried distance. It failed spectacularly. Their paths crossed again at a mutual friends gathering, one of those casual evenings that pretended not to be important. Xiao Zhang arrived late, apologetic, and found her laughing at something someone else had said. The sound tugged at him, familiar and dangerous. She saw him, rolled her eyes, and said, "You're still dramatic with timing." "I learned from the best," he replied, and the ease of it surprised them both. The evening unfolded with teasing and tension, humor masking vulnerability. Friends watched with curiosity, sensing history without knowing its depth. Someone suggested a game, questions passed around like harmless entertainment. When it was Xiao Zhang's turn, the question was simple and cruel: what's something you wish you could change? Silence fell, brief but noticeable. He smiled, the public version of himself ready to answer, then paused. For once, he chose honesty. "I wish I'd been braver sooner," he said. Her gaze met his, and for a moment the room faded. She looked away first, heart pounding, fingers tightening around her glass. Later, on the balcony, she confronted him with a half-smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You don't get to say things like that casually." "I'm not being casual," he replied softly. The truth hung between them, uninvited but undeniable. Humor rescued them again when someone burst onto the balcony complaining about mosquitoes, breaking the spell with laughter. Life, it seemed, was determined to keep interrupting them, as if to test whether their connection could survive distraction. The real test came weeks later, unexpected and sharp. A letter arrived at her door, no return address, words typed with cruel precision. It accused her of using Xiao Zhang for attention, of chasing fame through association, of being a distraction he didn't need. She stared at the page, hands trembling, old insecurities flaring to life. She had chosen a quiet existence for a reason. She had learned the cost of loving someone whose life belonged to the public. She didn't tell him. Not at first. Xiao Zhang sensed the shift anyway. He noticed the delayed replies, the careful distance, the way her laughter seemed guarded. He asked if she was okay, received polite answers that felt like closed doors. The old fear returned, whispering that this was how it ended: misunderstanding, silence, regret. He refused to let it. When she finally confessed, voice shaking with restrained anger and hurt, he listened without interruption. He read the letter twice, jaw tightening, eyes darkening not with rage but with resolve. "This is what I was afraid of," she said quietly. "Not you. Everything around you." He folded the letter, careful, as if it were fragile. "I can't promise to make the noise disappear," he said. "But I can promise you won't face it alone." The choice stood before her, stark and unromantic. Stay and risk the chaos, or walk away and keep the peace she had built. Humor tried to soften the moment when he added, "I'm actually very good at blocking people. Professionally trained." She laughed despite herself, tears following quickly. "You're impossible. And you knew that 7 years ago." They didn't rush into declarations. They negotiated boundaries, tested trust, argued about small things like movie choices and big things like privacy. Emotional moments clashed with absurd ones, him being recognized at the worst times, her teasing him for forgetting his own hat in a cafe, him insisting fame hadn't prepared him for grocery shopping with a list. Tension built again when an opportunity arose that would take him overseas for months. Old patterns threatened to repeat, fear dressing itself up as practicality. "You should go," she said, trying to sound convincing. "I want to stay," he admitted. The surprise came not in his choice, but in hers. "Then go," she said, meeting his eyes steadily. "But come back because you want to, not because you're afraid of losing me." He realized then that love had changed them both. It was no longer about holding on tightly, but about trusting the space between. The farewell was bittersweet, layered with humor and unspoken promises. At the airport, he joked about bad plane food, she reminded him to sleep, and when they finally embraced, it was not desperate but grounded, full of window that did not break them apart. Distance tested them. Time zones played tricks. Miscommunications sparked brief storms. Yet each conflict ended differently than before, with conversation, with laughter, with effort. He sent her voice notes from hotel rooms. She sent him photos of plants that were finally thriving. When he returned months later, there were no grand gestures. Just a quiet evening, shared takeout, and the comfort of familiarity rediscovered. He looked at her then and understood that the greatest surprise of all was not falling in love again, but learning how to stay. Sinta and Rindu still existed, inseparable, intertwined. They were no longer wounds but reminders, of what had been lost, found, and chosen again. And as the city lights flickered outside, Xiao Zhang smiled, knowing that this story, full of humor, tension, and emotion, was no longer about running or returning, but about living honestly in the space love created. Life, however, was never satisfied with quiet happiness. Just when they began to believe that love could finally breathe without interruption, fate leaned closer and whispered another challenge. The city welcomed Xiao Zhang's return warmly, but warmth often hides pressure. New projects lined up faster than he could read the scripts. Every role promised depth, complexity, and awards, but each one demanded time, exposure, and sacrifice. The industry loved him fiercely, and love like that was possessive. One evening, as rain traced lazy paths down the window, he sat across from her, script untouched on the table. His humor failed him for once. "They want me to do it," he said. "A long series. 2 years. Filming abroad." She didn't answer immediately. She stared at the rain instead, as if it might offer guidance. 2 years was not a number. It was a memory waiting to repeat itself. "Do you want to?" she asked. He hesitated. That hesitation spoke louder than any confident yes. "I want to grow," he said slowly. "But I don't want to lose us." Her smile was gentle but tired. Love shouldn't feel like a hostage situation. He laughed softly, grateful. "You're right. I sound ridiculous." "No," she said. "You sound honest." The tension between ambition and affection pressed against them like opposing tides. Humor still visited them, late-night jokes, sarcastic comments about dramatic scripts, but beneath it, something fragile trembled. The old fear returned, not screaming, but whispering patiently. As days passed, misunderstandings crept in quietly. A missed call here, a delayed reply there. Nothing dramatic, nothing explosive, just enough to create distance. Xiao Zhan noticed it, tried to joke it away, but she felt herself retreating without meaning to. She remembered how it felt to wait once, how hope could turn into self-erasure. The breaking point arrived unexpectedly, sharp and unfair. A leaked photo surfaced online, Xiao Zhan standing too close to a co-star, laughing, the angle carefully chosen to imply intimacy. Headlines screamed betrayal. Comments burned. The internet, ruthless and bored, demanded a story. She saw it before he could explain. Her phone buzzed relentlessly, messages filled with concern, curiosity, judgment. She stared at the image, heart pounding, logic fighting emotion. She knew the truth of media manipulation, yet old wounds reopened easily. When he called, she didn't answer. Panic settled in his chest. He sent messages, voice notes, explanations layered with frustration and fear. Hours passed. Silence answered. That night, she finally confronted him, voice steady but eyes betraying her hurt. I told myself I wouldn't do this again, she said. I told myself I wouldn't let someone else's world swallow me whole. He listened, jaw clenched, not defensive, not angry, just present. I can't control what they say, he replied. But I can choose what I do. And I choose you. The simplicity of it disarmed her. No dramatic speeches. No promises of protection he couldn't guarantee. Just choice. Yet choice was heavy. I need time, she said. Not because I don't care. Because I care too much. He nodded, even though every part of him wanted to protest. I'll be here, he said. Not waiting. Just, here. Time stretched again, different this time. They didn't disappear from each other's lives, but they stepped back, allowing space to exist without panic. Xiao Zhang threw himself into work, channeling emotion into performance. Critics praised the rawness of his acting, unaware that the pain was real. She watched from a distance, pride mixing with sadness. She saw interviews where he smiled and deflected questions about love. She recognized the humor as armor. The surprise came when she least expected it. At a small charity event, unannounced and intimate, she found him standing on stage, no script in hand. His speech was unspectacular in form, but devastating in honesty. He spoke about fear, about growth, about learning that love was not something to postpone until success arrived. I once believed I had to become someone first, he said, voice steady. But I learned that becoming never ends. And love doesn't wait for perfection. She felt the room blur, emotions colliding like waves. This was not a declaration aimed at her alone, but it reached her all the same. After the event, he found her outside, leaning against a wall, trying to breathe. You always do things like this, she said weakly. Make it impossible to stay distant. He smiled, that familiar, gentle smile. I didn't do it for you, he said. I did it because of you. They talked for hours that night, not to resolve everything, but to understand it. They acknowledged fears without trying to erase them. They admitted love without demanding certainty. I still don't know what the future looks like, she said. He took her hand, not dramatic, not urgent. Neither do I. But I know who I want to face it with. Sinta and Rinda met again in that quiet moment, not as enemies, not as wounds, but as proof. Proof that love could be emotional without being destructive, tense without being cruel, humorous without hiding truth. The city continued to move, rumors continued to rise and fall, careers continued to demand more. But something had changed fundamentally. This time, they were not chasing love from opposite directions. They were walking beside it, imperfect, honest, and still choosing, again and again. And perhaps the greatest twist of all was this: love did not save them from uncertainty. It taught them how to live inside it. Uncertainty, once learned, does not disappear, it evolves. It waits patiently, reshaping itself into quieter questions that surface in ordinary moments. For Xiao Zhang and her, those moments arrived disguised as peace. They fell into a rhythm that felt deceptively simple. Mornings that began with shared silence, evenings punctuated by laughter over trivial arguments, nights where exhaustion outweighed fear. Love no longer announced itself loudly, it existed in habits. In the way he remembered how she liked her tea without asking. In the way she instinctively reached for his jacket when the air turned cold, even when she pretended not to notice. Yet beneath that calm, the world continued to watch. Fame never truly slept. A single glance, a single coincidence, could ignite speculation. Xiao Zhang had accepted that long ago, but what he hadn't fully accepted was how much it would test the person beside him. He learned restraint, not because he was afraid, but because he respected the weight his presence carried in her life. One evening, after a rare day with no schedules, they wandered through a night market, caps pulled low, laughter shared softly. It felt rebellious in the smallest way, like reclaiming something ordinary. He joked about his inability to bargain, she mocked his terrible pronunciation of local slang, and for a moment, they were simply two people getting lost among lights and smells. The tension returned when a fan recognized him. The crowd gathered quickly, phones raised, excitement blooming. Xiao Zhan handled it gracefully, signing autographs, smiling, apologizing. She stood a few steps back, invisible and very visible all at once. He caught her eye, silently asking if she was okay. She smiled and nodded. She always smiled and nodded. Later, as they walked home, humor faded into something heavier. "I don't mind sharing you with the world," she said quietly. "I just don't want to disappear in it." He stopped walking. The seriousness in her voice demanded it. "You won't," he said firmly. "Not if I have a say." "But do you?" she asked, not accusing, just wondering. "Sometimes it feels like love has to ask permission." The words lingered long after they reached her door. That night, Xiao Zhan couldn't sleep again. He realized that loving someone when you are famous isn't just about protection, it's about choice, sacrifice, and redefining success. He had chased dreams for years, believing love would patiently wait at the finish line. Now he understood that love walked alongside you, sometimes slowing you down, sometimes daring you to choose differently. The opportunity he had postponed returned with greater urgency. The overseas project promised legacy, international recognition, everything he had once imagined as the ultimate goal. The offer sat unopened on his desk for days. When he finally spoke, it wasn't dramatic. "I turned it down," he said one evening, watching her reaction carefully. She froze. "Because of me?" "Because of us," he corrected gently. "Because I don't want to wake up one day with everything I wanted and realize I lost the one thing that made it meaningful." Tears came unexpectedly, not from guilt, but from being chosen without conditions. "I never asked you to do that," she whispered. "I know," he replied. "That's why it matters." The surprise wasn't the decision, it was the peace that followed it. Their relationship shifted again, deeper, steadier. Humor returned without defense. Emotional conversations no longer ended in fear. Tension transformed into trust. When challenges arose, they faced them directly instead of circling around them. Then came the final test, quiet but profound. An ordinary afternoon. An ordinary conversation. She told him about a dream she had abandoned years ago, something small but deeply personal. He listened, really listened, and said, "Why not try again?" "I'm afraid," she admitted. He smiled softly. "So was I. For 7 years." That was when she understood. Love had not brought them back to who they were, it had carried them forward into who they were becoming. Sinta was no longer just passion. Rindu was no longer just longing. Together, they became memory, patience, courage, and choice. There was no perfect ending, no dramatic finale. Just two people standing at the edge of an uncertain future, hands intertwined, no longer asking whether love would survive, but trusting that it would grow. And perhaps that was the greatest surprise of all. The end did not arrive like thunder. It arrived quietly, the way truths often do when they no longer need to prove themselves. Time moved forward, indifferent yet generous. Seasons changed, projects came and went, headlines rose and faded. Xiao Zhan remained visible to the world, but something in him had settled. Fame no longer felt like a destination he was running toward, it became a landscape he walked through with awareness. And beside him, she no longer felt like someone borrowing space in his life. She had claimed her own. She returned to the dream she once abandoned, slowly, imperfectly. There were failures, doubts, moments when she wanted to retreat into safety. Each time, he reminded her without pressure, without heroics. Sometimes with seriousness, sometimes with humor that made her laugh when she wanted to cry. "You know," he said once, watching her work late into the night, "if this doesn't work out, you'll still be terrifyingly stubborn." She laughed, throwing a cushion at him. "And you'll still be annoyingly supportive." "Occupational hazard," he replied. Love matured in the ordinary. In grocery lists. In quiet disagreements that ended with understanding instead of silence. In emotional nights when fear resurfaced, not as a threat, but as a reminder of how far they had come. The world never stopped testing them completely. There were still rumors, still curious eyes, still moments when privacy felt fragile. But something fundamental had shifted. They no longer measured their relationship against the noise outside. They measured it against honesty. One evening, long after the city lights had dimmed, they returned to the cafe from years ago. The same corner, the same smell of coffee, the same hum of distant conversations. It felt almost unreal, like stepping into a memory that had learned how to breathe again. "You promised you'd come back," she said softly, stirring her cup. "I did," he replied. "I just didn't know I'd have to learn how first." They sat there, not as the people they once were, but as the people they had fought to become. There was no dramatic confession waiting to happen, no need for vows or grand statements. Love no longer needed an audience. Later, as they walked home, she stopped suddenly, looking at him with a seriousness that startled him. "If one day," she said, choosing her words carefully, "this life becomes too heavy for me, will you let me go?" The question cut deep, not because it suggested leaving, but because it demanded honesty. He took her hands, steady and warm. "If letting you go is what love asks," he said quietly, "I will. But until that day, I will choose you. Every time." Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness, but from relief. "That's all I ever wanted," she whispered. "To be chosen without being owned." They continued walking, steps aligned, no rush, no fear of what waited ahead. Cinta no longer burned recklessly. It glowed steadily. Rindu no longer hurt. It reminded them why presence mattered. And if anyone asked how their story ended, the answer would never be simple. Because it didn't end with a kiss, a wedding, or a perfect promise. It ended with something far rarer. Two people who had once lost each other, standing side by side, no longer asking whether love was enough, but living as proof that it was.